Roleplay Ukraine. We are here today for gathering money for charity, of course, to medical supplies to our warriors in Ukraine, and to meet such wonderful guests like Dr. Megan Cullen, hello,
Hello.
and Alicia Figliuolo
Oh,
from Geek Therapeutics. So, can you tell us about your organization? Like to present yourself and your cool methods and ideas.
Should we roll initiative who goes first?
I mean, I have a dice. You want to? I can roll.
I can always roll. I always have dice by me now.
I'm not going first, y'all. I got a 4.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
let's say I got a 5. I'm barely going first.
You got it.
I've got it. So hello, everybody. I am Dr. Megan Connell. I'm actually one of the founding board members of Geek Therapeutics. I still serve on the board there. I helped to develop the therapeutic GM training through that we offer the certification program, doing a lot of the lessons there. I also teach a lot of the classes on how to bring geeky interests into the therapy practice. And then I also am the co-founder of Health Quest Innovative Therapeutics. It is a group practice out of Charlotte, North Carolina, where I practice physically and virtually.
And I am Alicia Figliuolo. I am the Director of Education and Training at Geek Therapeutics, where we train people on how to utilize geek culture in therapeutic and professional therapy spaces. And I'm also a United States Marine Corps veteran.
I'm an Army vet. Yeah, I did that too. And I wrote a book. And I have a podcast. I do a lot of stuff. Yeah, my book, Tabletop Role Playing Therapy, just recently, like just over a month ago now, just came out.
Super. Can you tell us about the specific? You tell about the goals. Maybe can we talk about the uniqueness of the methods, or what is the specific purpose of a TTRPG or geek culture in therapeutic methods in your school? So, what is so unique about it?
Well, one of the big things that we talk about is that geek culture is its own culture. It's its own identity. And it's important to feel seen when you're in therapy. You want to be with somebody who understands your culture and understands the terminology that you use, the things that you celebrate, the things that you like. They don't necessarily have to fully understand and be a part of that, but to actually have respect and a foundational knowledge of that culture is incredibly important. Just like for a lot of people who were in the military, they feel more comfortable talking to somebody who has had some military experience because there's a shared language, a shared experience there. And much in that same way, having that geek culture, that tie-in to those things can be very powerful.
And to continue that with tabletop role-playing games especially, that allows for individuals to process trauma, everyday stressors, or just life in a space that is oftentimes in the third person and in a way that we don't have to accept what's going on to our characters as ourselves. And it allows us to really cross transfer some things going on in our personal lives into the characters' lives that allow us to process those things in a safe, fantastical space while also telling stories collaboratively with our friends or our fellow defenders at the table.
Oh, great. So it's like in TTRPG, it's like you said, it's a safe place to process this, but it's also like mini social training. Yeah, so they can experience, and maybe isn't this a potential to take some new experience, or it's like where the healing of trauma ends and begins a new experience. Maybe can you explain some about the core mechanics, like we know in RPGs, like what actually is going on, like on these sessions? So
Mhm.
from start to the end, maybe it's like some special scenario that you are running, or maybe you have some types of scenarios, yeah, or maybe it's like the process, so you need
Mhm.
some expansions that you are using, and maybe something else.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I can speak to this pretty well because it's a lot of we were saying like what does it look like start to finish, and it looks like games you're going to play with your friends for the most part. It really is sitting around a table rolling dice, telling stories, and potentially talking in silly voices, especially if you're me. um, but what's a little bit different about these games when we're using them as a therapeutic tool is that we're trying to help them as a way to get the people who are playing to learn a skill that's not necessarily related to the game. So the groups that I run, we're processing a lot of social anxiety, overcoming histories of bullying and things like that. And so it's learning how to stand up for yourself, learning how to have assertive communication skills, how to confront different social situations through the role play. And, what we might do is if the person's having a lot of trouble, they know what skills are needed or they understand kind of what they're supposed to be doing, but they're having a hard time executing it, we might pause the game and everybody around the table talk about how could we approach this and what are some things that we could do, what are things that we've learned, what are techniques that we've maybe discussed, and then we practice it. And as far as being the characters, getting people to role play has been a big part of therapy for a long time. But the problem is people tend to be very hesitant to role play because it's embarrassing to role play yourself. It's just that's a good way to not have a good time, honestly. Is just going to be like, all right, pretend you're you, but you're more confident or you're more this. And so that's really hard to get people to buy into that. And so it's like, okay, you're going to be able to give a speech in front of a crowd of people, but not as you. You're going to be, Valor, the ranger who is defending the woodlands or something. And that person is able to stand up and to talk and to do these things. And so having that little bit of distance, like that ego distance between you and the character, seems to really help people process and figure out how to work through these things and to learn the skills in sort of a sneaky way. It's like we're indirectly learning rather than kind of directly saying, okay, you're going to learn this skill and here's how you're going to practice it. It's sort of like you don't even realize you're practicing it as you're playing.
Mhm. It's great. It's like with I think it's like with children. So we have some practices with children, and they also tend to more be more in the role in this. When they are playing as characters. Actually, like 13 years ago, I learned my first advanced social skills from my character. So I designed
Yep.
him, and then I learned the skills, and it felt like very magical because I didn't have them, but I had something in my head that explains it. So I could be a character with these social skills, but I couldn't be a person with the social skills. So
Mm-hmm.
it was the first my TTRPG experience. So and it was great, even instant learning in skills, maybe 5 sessions or something. Um,
You bring up a really interesting point, Anton. I think that we forget that as we age, we should not be letting go of the idea of the imagination and the idea of play. But as we grow up, we're told stop acting like a child, do things that are more age appropriate, don't play Pokemon, don't play with swords, and grow up. And we're forced to become this idea of an adult that our parents and our grandparents viewed as being what grown looks like. And when you look at TTRPGs in this space, especially therapeutically, as we're talking about it and raising money for men and women who are on a front line, the idea that we can't play or have imagination really breaks who we are as people because there's so much awful going on in the world, to be able to set back away from that and have our imagination create scenarios or instances or encounters that don't have to look like the real world is actually very powerful. And when you talked about learning your first big social skill through a game, the beauty in that is hopefully over the year or two that you learned that, it moved forward into your actual real life and you were able to pull from what your character learned and experience that in the real world. And that is really the whole crux of TTRPGs in therapy or in therapeutic spaces. Learning those skills that might not look like therapy per se, but learning life skills that are moving you through a game with your friends or your family or your coworkers, and then allowing you to frontward face that into the world to encourage you and empower you to move forward. So I think that's an amazing moment that you brought up.
Yeah. And it's like it's a little bit anxious in Ukraine now because of playing games while war is around you. But it's like I think it's most needed for us, for most of us, because it brings some energy, brings some joy in hard days. And I heard that. Tolkien developed some sorts of role-playing games at war and after war. So it was a method like to maybe to lower down on this anxiety and problems. What are the most popular problems that you're but that you're working with at Geek Therapeutics?
I think it's all kinds, really. Like, in the types of people that benefit from the role-playing games, it's kind of what groups you're wanting to work with. There's a lot of groups out there for folks on the autism spectrum. There are groups out there for folks struggling with PTSD, anxiety, depression, all sorts of things. One of the things we're hampered by with role-playing games as a form of therapy is we don't have a lot of research yet to show where it's most helpful. But it seems to be fitting for a lot of different diagnoses. And again, it's because it's not necessarily about the mechanics of the game so much as the skills of the therapist running the games and being part of the games and bringing in the skills that they know their clients need to learn and finding a way to weave those skills into the mechanics of the game.
Continue that thought. To continue that thought, therapy and therapeutic is two different words. And you can have a therapeutic game without a mental health provider and a clinician, because as we come together as people and we just play an everyday game, you're still able to have camaraderie, you're still able to have community. And as you tell a story together, there's this idea and this feeling of it being cathartic. And that is therapeutic. It might not be in with a therapist that has a pretty much a lesson plan or a treatment plan built out where you are having objectives that are skill based or a reason to learn or process a specific experience or trauma. In therapeutic gaming with our friends and our family, we can still have those really amazing, jovial, and cathartic moments, allow us to feel connected in a way that we might not have felt connected prior to the game starting. So TTRPGs in therapy and TTRPGs in a therapeutic setting are really twofold. One is with a licensed or an individual who has been educated to be a doctor or a clinical provider or a therapist. And on the other hand, it's people coming together and playing a game that have intention. And therapeutic gaming is intentional. It's not just let's go hack and slash some goblins, get some coin and drink some beer at the pub, and then hopefully go find a dragon in the future. It can be so much more than that. And I think that's what the beauty of Geek Therapeutics is in this space, is it doesn't just have to be therapy with a therapist. That's a very hard line, but it can also be cathartic. And you can learn and grow and move through a game and learn more about yourself without having a mental health professional. But when you're looking at it as a mental health game and using it in a space for a doctor, there's a very big different jump. And I think that it's great to be able to have both sides of that coin with Dr. Megan and myself, and hearing what's going on with other people. Because D&D is not therapy, and I need to make that very clear. Dungeons and Dragons is not therapy when you're playing with your friends. Dungeons and Dragons or TTRPGs is therapy when you have someone like Dr. Megan or a provider in Ukraine or any other country that's watching that has the ability to say, okay, let's work on your mindfulness, or let's work through your trauma. That is therapy. Playing a game with someone like Ton, who is making a very intentional encounter, that is role playing in a therapeutic space. So just to identify those two things, they are very different.
Mm-hmm. And I always have to put in the cursory, like, if you are not a trained mental health provider, do not try to help your friend work through their trauma, especially without training yourself or their consent.
Yeah, there are lots of actual. We had, I think, most of us geeks at the tabletop had some problems like social fights, like problems with understanding the death of the character, the character social interactions with the GM, the other characters at the table, and a lot of trauma actually went from the table to my life and not from my life to the table, but maybe vice versa. I don't know. Actually, maybe some problems at the table are from like old traumas, but I know a lot of people that experience some of this problem, small or large, but it's all about the safe place. But maybe it's good to experience some mini trauma at the table, that to be prepared. What do you think about it? What is the golden the golden standard for the process?
Well, again, there's not a golden standard, but I think also this idea that we're going to play through traumas and things as sort of rehearsal or practice, like there is something to that. The developmental psychologists will talk about like how children will play with darker themes a lot of times of like, okay, we're going to play that so and so's dead. A lot of kids play different types of war games, or good guy, bad guy chasing each other, trying to hunt each other down type of games, and like those. When we've played, most of us, I think, have played games like that as a child, and we can be like, yeah. But then when we think about it a little more, it's like, wait, what's really going on there? Where I'm choosing to play this game where like I'm pretending to hunt down my friend. Like that's kind of weird, but it's also not, because we're playing through these things and we're kind of working on these harder concepts in that safe space where it's like, I know there's no consequences here. So it's okay to play out like, what is the grief going to be like when somebody I'm very close to dies? So maybe like, an NPC that your characters really enjoyed and had a lot of interaction with, you are unable to save, and how that hurts. And that emotion we feel is very real. But again, we have that little bit of ego distance from it. And so it allows us to process it and examine it in a different light. And so I think there's something very helpful there. And as far as like intentionally bringing traumas into the game and stuff like that, I'm a big fan of getting consent and talking to your players about it. I have certain NPCs that are very annoying and antagonistic that tend to show up in my games, my therapeutic games especially. And I let my players know about that. And I talk about it and say like, okay, if it gets to be too much, let me know. Here's why this character is going to be here. This is what I'm trying to do with them. And it's not about this surprise, like knowing that this character is specifically designed to be somebody that they have to stand up to is actually very helpful to them.
And when we talk about frustration at the table, or we talk about things transferring to you, Anton, or whomever is the game master, a lot of that can be alleviated by starting every new campaign, every one shot, anytime someone's at the table, with a very foundational session zero. And at Geek Therapeutics, we teach session zero as the gold standard. If we're talking about what a gold standard in creating or playing a TTRPG is, down before playing with your table and creating a session 0 where everyone has a consent and gaming form, which if you don't have access to in your home language, there is a free consent and gaming form through Monty Cook. And they've allowed anybody to use it because we want to start this first idea of role play with consent and boundaries. And in that session 0, everybody lets the game master know, this is my hard lines. These are things that I will refuse to play with. It's really greatly coded with red, yellow, and green. And as you start that consent form with each of your players, you come together as a table and you have a table consent form. And that consent form is the average of what all of these boundaries are. And it really does help alleviate some of the confusion and frustration and anger that can come from the table during encounters, during crosstalk, when a player might be saying something out of character and maybe they become a little angry or mean or vicious towards another player. And then in game, when that in game fighting also happens. But it does protect you, the game master, from having that transfer come towards you when you can say, okay, we all consented. These are our boundaries. And this is the contract that we started with, and we all need to go back to revisiting what this contract means. And that has helped lots of individuals who have come to Geek Therapeutics wanting to figure out how to fix that infighting and that transference between game and game master. And then they have this amazing epiphany of learning how to conduct a session 0 properly. And they have found that in-game fighting or the frustration between player and game master kind of just melts away, because now you have a document that everybody agreed to. And so if anybody's having those issues, please go and look at Monty Cook's consent and gaming form. There are lots of them on the internet. I am partial to Monty Cook's because I think it's very clear with color coding and words. So if you have any questions or you need to find that, you can always reach out to myself or Dr. Megan at Geek Therapeutics, and I will gladly get you a link to Monty Cook. And it's form fillable, so you don't even have to write it your players. Your players don't have to write on it. They can just click a button and type it if that's something they would prefer. But I do believe the golden standard to starting any TTRPG prior to bringing in encounters is that there needs to be a session 0 where you talk about consent, you talk about boundaries, and you teach people how to advocate for themselves in situations that might happen like that.
Yeah, and to kind of expand to like our amazing skill for game masters to have, not just therapeutic, any game master, is just how to talk to people, how to have difficult conversations. There's so many times when we're playing just for fun and a challenge comes up and nobody's talked to anybody. Nobody's had that just base conversation of like, hey, that's not cool, or I don't like it when you do that. And so making sure that you can talk to people is really important.
We just had some conversation in our chats from TTRPG, and that actually raised a lot of questions. Not all your players at even therapeutic, maybe that's the standard game. Not all of your players are self-aware enough to know their triggers, and not all of your players are good at social skills actually to tell somebody about their triggers, even on session 0, and expecting that every game master from old Ukraine or other countries has some really good therapeutical skills and psychological knowledge to talk about these problems effectively. I think it's a real problem. And I was at the other people talked about you need to talk about the problem. So you need to talk about everything with your players. But sometimes it's like really hard to talk the problem away. And maybe the GM in therapeutical game, I know that like a professional psychologist will be the not the judge, like the main figure that can transfer something at the table. But the normal GM at the standard game, what do you think? What is the role of the GM in some conflict situations, in some traumatic experience of the player? do GMs need to interfere, or they need to be silent or something like that?
That's going to really depend on the nature of the situation. I actually, through my company, Geeks Like Us, I have a series called Psychology at the Table, where I talk about how game masters can be more understanding of their players who maybe struggle with depression, anxiety, mathematic disorders, just understanding group formation issues. And that can be very helpful to have conversations. I think the bigger thing, though, is like if something comes up and you really feel like this has hit on something for the player that is something they need, to go to therapy for. If you as a friend and game master can be kind enough to sit with that person and just help them as they find a therapist. You don't need to be their therapist unless you should not be their therapist. But to sit with them and just help them get to the resources that they need. This is maybe an extreme example, but in the same regards of like, if you were at a session and one of your players started having a medical emergency, nobody's expecting the game master to be able to handle that at the table, right? But being able to go, we need to get you to the hospital and help facilitate getting you to the care you need. Hopefully anybody at the table could do that. But, certainly there's the game master, has that positional authority in the room. And so that's something to think about. And to what Alicia was saying with like the session 0 and setting those rules, like that's where we talk about conflict. We also in session 0 talk a lot about safety tools. In my book, I talk about using something that I call dynamic safety tools, where you create that list of the red, yellow, green topics, come up with a plan. But like you said, not everybody knows their triggers right off the bat. Like I had some myself for a personal game. I didn't bother putting on the list because I was like, this is not going to come up in a game. This is so small. And of course it did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in that game at that time, we didn't have a way to handle that. And so, coming up with these dynamic safety tools. And so all they are tokens that the players can use to communicate with the game master of what's going on. So if we're in like a situation we're worried that our players aren't doing well, we might ask like, how's everybody doing? And they can hold up a little yellow smiley face to say, I'm good. Things are good. They've got another one that's like that little meh face where the mouth is a line. It's kind of like, not loving this. I'm okay. But I don't want to go much further down this path. We've got a red X for I'm not good. This needs to stop. And then a blue pause button for I don't know what's going on. I have questions and I don't want to completely disrupt the flow of the game, but I do need to pause so we can figure out what's happening right now. And having those tools in place is incredibly important to help the players in those moments where something comes up that they didn't think of in session 0, have a tool that they can use to communicate of like, we need to stop. This has stopped being fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it is the game master's responsibility to hold their players' mental health, because that is a burden for anybody. And we often find that if I am holding on to my brother or my sister's trauma or their burdens, I too am becoming overburdened or overwhelmed. Or if we're talking in D&D terms, like that's what encumbrance is, right? Getting overloaded with weight. And it's not the job of the game master. And so for the game masters listening or watching, it's not your job to maintain your players' character sheets. It's not your job to maintain their mental wellness. It is your job to make sure that you are not creating scenarios or encounters that are going to put them into a space that is problematic, that is harmful, that is crossing a boundary that could cause them to be in a place where they may need to seek out professional help. Your job is to make sure they're having fun in a safe, fantastical space, not causing harm. And we see that in some home games where the DM is like, I'm just going to go out and try to murder all of these players in a one shot and make sure that they all know that I am the king of this story. That is very problematic. And some people play that way and like it. But if you're not having consent and talking about those things, that's where you become problematic with your players. And as Dr. Megan has talked about, there the idea of having these tactile and textile objects to help the game master know that, okay, we need to pause, we might need to fast forward, maybe we need to rewind because they didn't get as much knowledge or information. Maybe we need to stop and everybody needs to take a break and go grab some Cheetos and a Red Bull. Because safety tools allow us to have those moments of we need a break. And just like Dr. Megan, I too have created a whole set of dynamic safety cards that look like an old school VCR, where if you're older, you know what it's like putting in a tape and having to push fast forward and rewind and stop and pause and play. And then making sure that you can scrub a video if it becomes blurry. And when you use things like that, give our players agency about themselves to say, you know what, I'm just not ready for this, or I can't do this. And just like Dr. Megan said, having that really alleviates the game master having to take on so much burden, because it makes it very clear that it is the player's responsibility to maintain their mental wellness in the game and be able to be vocal. And if you don't want to use your words, you don't have to. You can use chips like Dr. Megan has. You can use a 2x3 playing card like I have. It allows us to know exactly what our players are trying to communicate without even using words, or they can say it. It really does help the table manage everything going on for themselves, as well as you managing the story, because it's not, again, your responsibility to manage your players' mental wellness or their character sheets. Your job is to tell a story that is safe and fun and fantastical.
Great. So not a GM's responsibility, but maybe some GMs from Ukraine or other places that are interested in theme. Maybe somebody with like psychological background like me, or maybe somebody who are not psychologists at all. Can they study the methods of Geek Therapeutics, or how long does it take, and how professional in this way can you become?
I mean, Megan and I can both answer that question. So,
Yeah.
Megan, do you want to take the ads? Because Ton does have a degree in psychology, so he has a very different outlook, right? So, do you want to take the clinical side of that question, and I'll take the non-clinical side of the question?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll let you start with the non-clinical side first, and then we'll go up from there.
So that's really interesting, right? Because there isn't a lot of research right now that is within the standard of what the world thinks as good collective research, where they're looking at 10 years now versus it used to be 20. And so in therapeutic gaming, we do have a program that non-clinical, so non-mental health professionals do not have education in psychology or the other mental health professions can take the exact program that the clinicians take, but they learn how to use the knowledge in an everyday gaming space. They learn all the right words, because we should be educated on how or when things become harmful and what it means to create documents if you were writing notes, whether they be for doctors or they just be for game. You learn all the exact same knowledge. However, you're not moving into a space, and you're being taught not to move into a space that is taking a treatment plan and moving through a game that is targeting very specific goals. So for non-medical people who take this course, I've had Polish lawyers, I've had Polish teachers, I've had Australian and New Zealanders who are a police officer, and an individual who is an everyday game master who plays with their children and wants to run an after school group in their public library. I've had librarians take the course, and they want to have the knowledge of running impactful, intentional, and meaningful encounters. And that's what a non-clinical therapeutic game master is. You learn how to write an intentional encounter. So you are not harming your players, and you're doing it within the confines of that session zero. And that's what we really teach non-clinical people, is how to utilize tools to make sure your game is safe, your game is fun, and your game is intentional, because we want to play with intention. And so, yes, anybody can come to Geek Therapeutics. Anybody can learn how to be a therapeutic game master. But the difference is one side is meant with a goal at the end to process trauma or stress or everyday experiences with a licensed or a mental health professional who has education in psychology, like in Ukraine, not playing and trying to doctor your friends. And so on the non-clinical side, absolutely. It's just a little different when it comes to what you are able to do. And you can professionally use it. We have an individual in Australia who is using therapeutic game mastering for an after-school program with kids to help teach them how to engage with other children. But he's not doing it because they have a mental health diagnosis. He's doing it to help them create life skills like you talked about a while ago, having those life skills in game. And then I have another individual who actually works with a therapist and is playing a game for children and young adults, who is working in tandem with a therapist. The therapist is doing all the doctor work and all the mental health work. So yes, you can be a non-clinical therapeutic game master. But then Dr. Megan's going to have the other side of that, where you have to have a mental health license, or in Ukraine's instance, be an educated professional in the degree of psychology.
Yeah. And for the clinical side, it's the real big difference between the, non-licensed provider, run therapeutic games or skills games, and the therapeutic games is the therapy part of it. Like if you're running a game where you're teaching skills, that's a skill-based game. That's not a therapeutic game. It's learning a skill set. And in the United States, that's a very important difference for several reasons. Like skill games aren't subject to HIPAA laws, so that's our privacy laws, where we have to protect data and all kinds of things. If it is a clinical psychology therapy group, then you do need to follow HIPAA guidance laws. You need to follow documentation rules. There's a lot more things that are done to keep the participants of the group safe, to keep their identity safe, to keep their medical privacy safe. And so there's a lot more burden there. And so it's certainly an awesome tool. And what we learn on the licensed clinician side of it is how to take all of these evidence-based interventions that we've learned for, a wide array of diagnoses, and then to weave those lessons into this game, to make the game rewarding and engaging enough that the participants are there and are still picking up the skills that you're wanting. So again, I know that I talk a lot about anxiety, and that's just because those are the groups I run. There are certainly other groups, but if I'm wanting my, folks to learn how to use a grounding technique, we might do a lot of things that are stressful in the game, and to help the players feel that anxiety and feel the, being keyed up, so that they can practice the skills of deep breathing and grounding that we've been learning to kind of bring themselves back down and to regulate their own emotions.
Great answers. Thank you so much. We have actually a lot of questions from the chat, and can we sort them so not quick answers, concentrated answers?
Yes.
About the first question: what TRPGs are you running for West? How do you deal with themes of grief, loss, trauma, death, and combat situation in classic RPGs?
Oh, that's a big one.
You can take it, Megan.
Yeah. So in the classic RPG, it's sort of with people who have had trauma or dealing with issues around grief and death, it's talking about that and talking through. There's this great quote that Lauren Urban, who used to be the community manager for D&D Beyond, now she works, I think, at Idle Champions, said that just because I know a roller coaster passed its safety inspection doesn't mean I can't still enjoy the ride. And so, when something bad is coming up, I talk to my players about it. One of the other many things that I do is I run a live play D&D campaign called Clinical Role, where all of my players are other therapeutic game masters, psychologists, and friends of psychology. And we had a session where they had rescued a bunch of NPCs, and they were going to be fleeing. And it was going to be challenges of having to, get across a river, go across a rickety bridge while they're being pursued. And I believe I actually had this conversation live on stream where it's like, guys, NPCs are going to die. Like this is going, you're not going to be able to, like, just by the odds of rolling, like you're not going to be able to rescue all of these NPCs with what I have planned. Are you all in a place where that's okay? Because if it's not, we can do something else tonight. It's going to be a different arc. It's going to be a different adventure. And, you know, giving them that ability to say no and to say yes, but also like giving them that agency, you know, of if they're rescuing them and going, if there are any children, I'm not cool with the children dying. It's okay. The children have plot armor. They're, no matter, like, you got to roll, everything's a natural one, but the kids are going to get out. And having that willingness, I think, as a game master too, to let go of some of that control. Because I think some GMs have a very hard time letting go of the control. And like, they also, there seems to be this thing that I've noticed, especially like on online discussions that I've seen, where the GMs have this tendency to really want to hold secrets over their players' heads and like hurt them as much as they can, right? It's like, how brave of you. You created an NPC, or you created a PC who has a loving family. How can I destroy this? Right? You know? And that's not always cool, man. You know, it's sort of like talking about like, okay, you can take, you know, that kind of give and take, right? It's that discussion. If somebody has had a lot of trauma or something come up, you know, it's like, how far are we willing to push this? Do you want to see happen? Are there any, like, you need this thing to be okay? And what is that going to look like? Sorry, I know that was long. I know you were trying to go fast. Sorry.
Fine. It's about GM's passion of killing stuff and the GM's over controlling things. It's like, I think it's in the most games is a problem. A question, I think, to Alicia. Do you need to be a geek veteran to benefit from therapeutic TTRPGs? Or any veteran can benefit from it? Or maybe it's like you said about it, but maybe we need the confirmation that those therapeutic and other therapeutic games are not only for veterans, but maybe you say something new.
Sure. Yeah. So no, you don't have to be a veteran, right? I work mostly with veterans, and I am a veteran, and so that's a little different. And you don't have to be a geek, and that's the other thing. I teach and train people all day long who don't know anything about geek culture. They have no idea why their students or their kids come to them and say, well, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And they're all, I don't even know what that is. And so they come to us to learn what Dungeons and Dragons is. And I think this is something that both Dr. Megan and I really love, is it can bring so many people to the table that you would have no idea even play. And in America, we're currently finding out in the United States that some of the biggest American football players are Dungeons and Dragons players, and they use it to de-stress coming off the football field. That's huge, because those men would never have said outside of the locker room that, oh yeah, we play D&D after Thursday night football, or on Friday when we're traveling on the bus or a plane, we get to our hotel and we play D&D. So no, you don't have to be a veteran to be a therapeutic game master. You don't have to be a veteran to play therapeutic games, and you don't have to be a geek, because if you don't prescribe to any of this, that doesn't mean that you can't learn how to play the game and play with your friends and have fun at the table. And it doesn't mean that you can't learn how to use it effectively in spaces that are helping people walk through some trauma. Veteran is just an easy way to really talk about it, because that's my people, right? Like, and those are the people we're raising money for. So for me, it's easier to talk about it at light than give a whole gamut or line of people. But football players in the US are playing it. There are soccer players in Europe who are playing. And it's really great, because we would never have known that they were nerds or geeks, because you might think they are. They just like to play a game, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found out recently NASA astronauts are playing too.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Also, it's
In
great.
space. Can you imagine?
Dungeons and Dragons space. So there's a problematic question about actually it's very interesting in Ukraine now. Does running usual D&D without therapist to veteran could be traumatic? So with no therapeutical purpose. So we have some real problems. My friends are mm, some of my friends are at war now and playing games with them. Some people, some GMs have this anxiety. How they can handle this could maybe they need some preparations. We already talked about social contract and session zero, but actually, I think you know that veterans are like really hard people for about their triggers and other stuff. So they will not confess, but maybe some hints to prevent explosions on sessions?
Talk to them. Talk to, like sit down one-on-one, not in front of everybody else. Sit down with them and be like, just level with them. Be like, dude, I know you were in the war. Like, I know you've, I don't know if we were allowed to swear or not, but I've seen some stuff. And I'm going to do my best to make sure nothing comes up in the game that's going to be triggering for you. But if something does, what can I do to help you in that moment? Do you want me to do a timeout and say I need to use the bathroom so that everybody can take a break? What, it doesn't need to be an obvious thing for everybody else. The table is just something you and I know. What can I do to help?
Yeah, that's actually a great hint. Also, if you're playing in a digital space, look at your clock and give a break if you need to every 35 to 40 minutes. Say, everybody go take a bio break, be back in 5. Because that 5-minute break is going to calm down almost anybody's nerves and help re-regulate. I also like to start everything with my veterans with a grounding technique. I have them roll their own D20. They look down at the dice and take that many deep breaths and then start the game. So they're kind of re-regulated. And for anybody who is not a veteran playing with their friends coming back, watch their body language, because they're going to start twisting their pencil. They're going to start fidgeting with their dice or flicking things. When you notice those, if it lasts for more than 30 seconds, take a break and say, everybody go take a bio break, because you stop the story, they're going to follow suit and they're going to get up and go to the bathroom and get a drink or grab some food. And it allows you to just cut the air a little bit and to give some breathing room, because it's very hard if you don't have the same lived experience to be able to connect with them. And like Anton said, and whoever asked the question, you're 100% right. They're not going to confess to you. I can guarantee you that in 2 or 3 weeks, because we see it all the time in our own work, by week 3 or 4, they're going to open up to you and you're going to become a family, and you're going to be the person and the game and the table that they're going to talk to. And you're going to see that you're not going to have to rely on what Megan and I just said, watching them, getting up for bio breaks, having those one-on-one conversations, because that's going to melt away and you're going to be the people that become their people. And that's some of the most beautiful gaming you could ever have, to be there for a friend or a family member coming back who really doesn't know how to just be. And that's the hardest thing that's going to happen, is they just don't know how to be. And you're going to be there for them.
The next question is also about our defenders, and it's like more tricky, I think. We've got such thing as idealization of our defenders. It's pretty normal in our situation, and which are basic principles to communicate with veterans to help them feel as equals with other geeks. So it's like a real problem even in talking with them after some accidents and some, you know that. And to play with them, it's like a very problematic.
Yeah, I saw this a lot when I was in the military, because soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, people would stop and say thank you. And a lot of them had a real hard time with that and didn't like the attention, didn't like all of this. And so it's sort of like how to internalize that and how to sit with people who are like, oh my gosh, what you're doing is so amazing and so wonderful. And it's like, I'm still just a person and I just want to roll some dice and tell a story. And I think for the game masters, again, unfortunately, like a lot of the burden does tend to fall to the game master because, again, you have that situational authority. But it's just to say, it's like, but here we are all level 2 and we are starting together. And I think, like, for anybody, once the mystery of something goes away, it doesn't become such an issue anymore. Like if you meet somebody that you've admired for a long time and you maybe like you have those nerves for the first few minutes talking to them, but then after a day or two of talking with that person, like that starts to go away and you realize, oh, they're just a person. They're just a person that I know in a different capacity or I think of in a different capacity.
Into the character is a lot, yeah. So you said we all are level 2, so it's magical words about sticking to your character more than to the person at the table. Is helpful.
I think 100%, and I also think it's really important to realize that we all put our pants on the same way, and we talk about the kindness and the thank you and thank you for volunteering and going to doing something really crappy and then being kind of starstruck, right? Because these people are coming back and we're really thankful for them. But I mean, I can give a very real example. Dr. Megan in the TTRPG world and in my research for my own thesis is a big part of my research. And when I got to meet Megan, it was this moment of, oh my gosh, like I've read so much of your writing, you have shaped a lot of what I have done. And I don't even know if she knows this. But I had that moment of how do I even have a conversation with her? And then I realized, one, okay, she's also a veteran. So we have that connection. But at the end of the day, she's just a normal person who tells really awesome stories and give great hugs. And that was the way to just connect with her. And so for you guys who are playing with the defenders coming back, remember that a year ago, I mean, where are we at now? Like 14, 16 months ago, we were just everyday men and women who worked in tech, who worked at the grocery store, who were working somewhere in the industrial complex of Ukraine. They were just your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa. And don't treat them any different because they already feel 1,000% different. They just want to come home and be Anton again. That's all they want to be. And if you can remember that, that is what's going to help them get through and play and just be as they're never going to be normal again. I don't want to say that. They're going to find a piece of themselves that they didn't have over the last couple of years. And to be treated any differently is going to make them feel like they're forever going to be different. They will forever be changed. If you can just love them for who they are and remember that they were your brother, your sister, and worked maybe at Apple a year ago, that they're still that person. They just have a new lived experience. And don't ask them about the lived experience. Don't ask them what they saw or heard, because that is just going to continue to re-traumatize them. If you can be the best game master, don't bring that into your game unless it is asked for to help process that with a medical professional. Treat them like they are the everyday person.
Yep. Well, I will say one thing that you could maybe ask the person, because I have seen this with some vets, is are there any skills that you learned that you really enjoy getting to flex your knowledge on? Right? Of like, did you learn about scouting and now you don't get to scout anymore because you're back at Apple. But yeah.
That's good.
Great.
That's a good one.
There are some questions about the information that you can share. The question about games recorded in an educational way was concerned, and I know that you have a channel, Megan, about the clinical role. So I think we will put a link down below in the announcements and about maybe you can recommend some reading, hard or light, that can advance skills, of course. Yeah, cool.
Which,
Uh,
Anton, I need to know what email to send a bunch of digital copies your way to, by the way.
Super. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We were in a hurry with the festival, and now we're like can't breathe. So
Yes.
we will share information from you to all our viewers, and at you said about the vets. So maybe you can tell some uh, little like this hint was sharing the skills and knowledge about scouting or tactics or something like that. Maybe you can share some little hints with civilians that are now uh, some of our civilians are in a really bad shape after and maybe some hints to uh, incorporate them in the game
Mhm.
to make them feel better.
I love that
I
question. And whoever asked it, I think that you are on a really great path of thinking about everybody in Ukraine right now. Because I would say that your civilians are probably just as traumatized, if not even more, because they don't have the training that your defenders on the front line have to duck, cover, and listen for what's coming above. And so that trauma that they have is very real. And I would ask, and I do think that having conversations with civilians is a little bit easier because you can ask, how did you start to hear, or what did you do differently at home? What did you do to prepare? What did you do to get your food and water before? And using the things that we do every day, what did you do to continue to smile? Because it doesn't always have to be about the ugly. What did you do to not let that awful human rob you of your joy in this moment, even though you were terrified?
Mhm.
How can we talk about your joy? Because that's the one thing we're missing. That's the one thing the United States has not experienced what you are experiencing. And we forget that people are experiencing this every day still. And finding
Yeah.
joy because you are being robbed of it, asking, how did you find your joy today? What can I do to make you smile? What can I do to help you, like your elderly, your grandmas and your grandpas? What can I do to get you water? What can I do to help you smile? And those are big moments because it's not bringing the war straight to their brain. It's, oh, I can think about something else. How do I do that?
Yeah. And I think
Sorry,
two
sorry.
two small things I would add to that because everything Alicia just said perfect and amazing. I think something to remember too with these tabletop games is you get your actions have a big impact on the world. And there is
Yeah.
something so powerful about being in a game where you actually do get to you can save the day, you can save the world. And maybe also having having those smaller moments in the game where it is just something joyful, right? Of like you need to go and recapture the pixies to bring them back to the festival so they can enchant all the lights and everybody can be really happy, right? Like that's a really silly quest. We're not killing anything, but like that kind of stuff can make your players so engaged and happy, and being willing to lean into some of those stories is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there other disorders besides social anxiety that TTRPG therapy is suited for? We already talked about it
Yeah.
in the first place. So the therapeutic effect, am I right? The therapeutic effect is actually universal. So universal for all problems that you can find. But about the therapy, I think you, Megan, experienced a lot of other disorders to
Mhm.
okay, so it's like maybe it's more for something and less for something, or it's not like this.
We don't know really. In my book, I talk about through every diagnosis that I think likely could benefit from using tabletop games as a form of therapy. And noting like there's only one disorder or one group of disorders that I know of that might not be very well suited to using tabletop games as therapy, and that's just because they don't respond well to group therapy. Group therapy has actually been found to be harmful for that it's eating disorders. You don't put people in eating disorders together. Typically, that does not bode well. But like, I actually did talk with somebody who was a specialist in eating disorders, and they were thinking of a way that it could be used. So who knows? I mean, it might not have limits.
Okay, and the last question for today is: have you found of course, the crunch? Have you do you know the system that is better suited for therapeutical effect, or like the D&D versus Fate? Maybe which is better, which is worse? Can you tell something about it?
I love this question. I play lots of RPGs. I love the less crunch, the better in therapeutic spaces, because crunch takes away from the role play, and I'm a very big collaborative storyteller, so I prefer the storytelling aspect to the dice mechanic role. But with that being said, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is the easiest and most accessible and available game in multiple languages for free at the basic rules and the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide. So you can play D&D for free if you go to D&D Beyond and you download their 3 free manuals. It allows that to be free. So that's a big win. However, I am not a fan of the crunchiness, because I think that causes frustration at the table when you are playing with new people or you are playing with people who want to tell stories. And so I have lots of RPGs that I love over that. I think Fate is a great system. I think a lot of things that come from Margaret Weiss are really great for storytelling. I love Powered by the Apocalypse if you're playing with people and you like playing with D6s and like the heavy story roll. There is a book in the back of Megan's screen right now, the Avatar Legends. That is an amazing role-playing system through Powered by the Apocalypse. It's great to tell collaborative stories in that are multicultural. And I really love a game called Index Card RPG. It is kind of like Dungeons and Dragons 5e, but very watered down. You get to use all 7 dice, but each dice have a specific role associated with them. And you're not allowed to take notes on anything more than a note card. So you're not spending a lot of time with these really heavy mechanics or this intense note taking. You're really focused on the role play. So those are my favorites. And D&D is great because it's free for people to get into. So, and I don't teach the rules. If you ever come to my class and you're like, oh, I want to take Alicia's class, I do not teach rules as written. And I have lots of fun with rules lawyers, because applied tabletop role playing or therapeutic role playing cannot function very well in rules as written, because sometimes you need to let people use their brain. And that's my philosophy. Not everybody else believes that. I don't know if Megan's philosophy is close to the same, but we do teach the same program. So, it could be different. But those are my favorites. I hope you guys play some of them. Let me know how you like them.
Well, and I say this in my book a lot, is that like there is no such thing as a perfect system for treating whatever disorder, because like the therapeutic game master needs to be able to run the system well enough that they don't think about it while they're running the game. Because if you are looking up rules and all of that while you're trying to run a therapeutic game, you're going to miss stuff that's happening at the table. And so like it doesn't matter maybe if, D&D is the best for this particular group you're working with, but you really know the cipher system and that's the one you like. Play the cipher system. It's fine. It's more about what you're teaching through the game than the game system itself. The game system is sort of just... I was originally going to be a music therapist, and so I think of the different rule systems just like different genres of music. Jazz is no more therapeutic than R&B, which is no more therapeutic than pop, right? Like they're all fine. They're all music at the end of the day. It's what connects with you as a therapist and what connects with your clients.
Great. Thank you so much for your answers. You're great guests. And I want to remind our viewers about the charity, about helping veterans and to supply them with meds. And do you want to say to our viewers before we end our today's role play Ukraine session?
Megan, you can go first if you want, or I can. It doesn't matter.
Just donate if you can, take care of people, and just be kind. Always be kind to people. It's so easy to smile and just give people the benefit of the doubt and be nice. It goes a really long way.
Yeah. If you can donate, right? But donation doesn't always come in the form of currency or money. If you can donate your time, if you can go check in on a neighbor, if you can go see how an elderly person is, check in on them. Ask them how they're doing, not just smile at them. Really engage, because that is as important as a donation with money. If you are able to be here tomorrow, come watch us play D&D with one of Ukraine's game masters and share the word, because what you are doing as a collective country is something that the world has not seen. And I've talked to Anton and this entire role play for Ukraine team, and I am so proud of all of you. I cannot imagine what you're going through, and the strength that you have to continue to play and to be here is a really great finger to a person who wants to take that away from you. And I won't say what I want to say, but I'm assuming all of you can hear it in my voice. Continue to smile and continue to get up in the morning, and don't let someone rob your joy because they think they own you. They don't. Know that in a year from now, hopefully we can sit here and have another conference and talk about all the greatness that Roleplay for Ukraine did for your defenders and for your civilians and for the game masters and players who are watching. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And with love and joy and future of Ukraine, we are ending our session today, and we will meet you tomorrow for more Roleplay Ukraine. Bye.